Ethan Blackwood was a billionaire the world admired. Ananya Mehra was a woman the world never saw, until her silence exposed a crime that money couldn't erase. The story began with a man who represented everything people admired about modern success. He was an Australian billionaire whose rise from an ordinary background had become a national inspiration. His companies controlled mining interests, luxury real estate, and offshore investments. Magazines portrayed him as disciplined, visionary, and untouchable. He carefully shaped his public image, appearing at charity events and business summits with a calm confidence that suggested nothing in his life was ever out of control. To the world, he was a man who had mastered both wealth and power. Away from cameras and applause, his personal life remained tightly guarded. When news quietly spread that he had married an Indian woman, curiosity followed, but answers were scarce. The wedding took place overseas, far from Australian media, attended by only a few trusted individuals. There were no interviews, no public celebrations, and no official photographs released. This secrecy only strengthened the belief that the marriage was deeply private and intentional. Many assumed it was a union built on love rather than convenience. The woman he married arrived in Australia shortly after the wedding. She left behind her family, culture, and independence, stepping into a world completely controlled by her husband. The mansion she moved into was grand but isolating, surrounded by high walls and constant security. She rarely appeared in public and did not form friendships of her own. Her life quickly revolved around routines set by others, not herself. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Staff followed strict confidentiality agreements and asked no questions. The billionaire continued his work as usual, expanding his empire while his wife remained invisible to the outside world. What no one knew was that beneath the surface of this perfect image, cracks were already forming. The marriage that appeared calm and secure from a distance was quietly becoming the starting point of a tragedy. She had grown up in India with modest expectations and a strong belief in stability. Her education had given her confidence, but it had also taught her to remain cautious in unfamiliar environments. When she married and moved to Australia, she believed she was stepping into a protected future. The early weeks felt overwhelming. The new country, the unfamiliar customs, and the sheer scale of her husband's wealth created a sense of distance between her old life and her new reality. Slowly, that distance turned into isolation. Her days followed a strict pattern. Meals were prepared at fixed times, medical appointments were arranged without consultation, and personal outings required approval. She did not work, study, or socialize independently. The staff treated her politely but formally, never lingering long enough to build trust. Phone calls to her family became shorter and less frequent. Travel back to India was always delayed, postponed with vague promises of a better time in the future. As months passed, she discovered she was pregnant. The news brought mixed emotions. There was hope, but also fear. Her health became a subject of constant monitoring, yet she was rarely allowed to meet doctors alone. She began keeping quiet notes about her condition, recording dates, symptoms, and small changes she noticed around her. Writing became her only private space. Physically, she appeared calm, but emotionally she felt trapped. The mansion felt silent even when full of people. Cameras watched hallways, and security guards followed routines that left no room for spontaneity. She sensed that her presence was controlled, measured, and observed. Despite everything, she still believed patience would lead to safety. She told herself that once the child was born, things would change. The pregnancy, she hoped, would secure her place and soften the rigid control surrounding her life. What she did not know was that the same pregnancy would soon place her at the center of a Growy. The change in him did not happen slowly. It arrived suddenly, like a switch being turned without warning. The billionaire had always been private, but now his attention shifted from business dominance to personal control. Late nights were spent reviewing documents stored in encrypted files, many of them connected to overseas legal matters. While examining old identity records linked to marriage and immigration paperwork, he uncovered inconsistencies that had been overlooked. Dates did not align, and background details told a different story than the one he believed. The discovery of her real age shook him deeply. The gap between what he had been told and what the documents revealed was significant. In his world, perception was everything. Media, investors, and political allies expected perfection. The thought that his carefully built image could be damaged by public exposure created intense fear. To him, the issue was not personal truth, but reputational risk. He saw the revelation as a betrayal rather than a misunderstanding. From that moment, his behavior changed. He became distant and watchful, tracking movements within the house and demanding updates on her health and activities. Financial control tightened further. Access to accounts was restricted, and all legal documents were reviewed under his supervision. The house rules grew stricter, and surveillance expanded quietly. His focus was no longer on building wealth, but on containing a secret he believed could ruin him. Internally, his thoughts turned dark. He convinced himself that the situation required a permanent solution. The pregnancy, instead of bringing stability, intensified his fear. A child would create lasting connections and questions that could never be fully erased. Every possible future he imagined ended with exposure and loss of power. Outwardly, nothing seemed wrong. He maintained his public schedule, attended meetings, and spoke confidently about upcoming projects. No one suspected that Bee. As the pregnancy progressed, the atmosphere inside the mansion grew heavier. Her body was changing, but her world remained frozen. Medical visits increased, yet they felt more like inspections than care. She was rarely given full explanations, and every prescription was delivered through others. Small details began to worry her. Meals tasted different on certain days, and she often felt dizzy without clear reason. These moments passed quietly, but she did not ignore them. Instead, she began writing everything down. Her journal became more detailed. She noted dates, physical symptoms, and unusual events around the house. She recorded times when security routines changed and when staff members seemed nervous. The entries were careful and factual, never emotional, as if she believed clarity might protect her. In those pages, she also wrote about her growing concern for the child she carried. She sensed that her safety and the baby's safety were no longer guaranteed. She started preparing quietly for departure. Small financial transfers were made in her name, barely noticeable among the billionaire's vast accounts. Important documents were copied and hidden. She researched medical facilities in India and checked travel requirements without using shared devices. These actions gave her a sense of control she had been missing. At the same time, the billionaire became increasingly attentive in ways that felt unnatural. He monitored her routines closely and asked indirect questions about her health and plans. His presence felt constant even when he was not physically near. She understood that any obvious move could put her in immediate danger. Despite the fear, she remained calm on the surface. She followed routines and avoided confrontation. Her hope rested on time. She believed that reaching the final months of pregnancy would force a shift, that public acknowledgement of the child would protect her. What she did not realize was that her preparations, though discreet, the night everything ended appeared ordinary on the surface. Security logs showed nothing unusual, and the household followed its normal routine. Yet hidden within the system were brief gaps that no one could immediately explain. Cameras paused, access records failed to update, and internal alarms were temporarily disabled. These moments passed unnoticed at the time, buried under layers of automated data. Inside the mansion, the silence felt deeper than usual, as if the building itself was holding its breath. By morning, the atmosphere shifted. Staff moving through the house sensed something was wrong before they could name it. She was found alone in her private space, unresponsive, with no visible signs of struggle. Emergency services were contacted, but the outcome was already sealed. The pregnancy ended with her life, and the child she had hoped would save her was gone as well. Initial assessments pointed toward a sudden medical complication, a tragic but natural event that required no deeper explanation. The billionaire reacted with controlled grief. He remained composed, handling arrangements swiftly and efficiently. A private medical team reviewed the situation, and a rapid decision was made to proceed with cremation. The speed surprised some, but no one challenged him. His influence ensured that paperwork moved without delay. By the end of the day, evidence that could have answered questions was already destroyed. Publicly, the story was framed as a heartbreaking loss. Media outlets reported the death with sympathy, emphasizing privacy and respect. There were no photographs, no extended investigations, and no interviews. Everything seemed final. However, not all records aligned. A hospital report filed before the cremation contained subtle irregularities. Certain biological markers did not match what doctors expected from natural pregnancy-related causes. The discrepancies were small, easy to overlook, but they existed. One official flagged the report. The investigation resumed quietly, without public attention at first. Authorities approached the case cautiously, aware of the billionaire's influence and legal power. What reopened the file was not suspicion of murder, but the need to explain inconsistencies in medical data. Forensic specialists reviewed preserved samples taken before cremation, focusing on chemical traces that should not have been present. The results suggested exposure to a rare substance, one not commonly found in household environments or medical treatment. Attention turned to the mansion. Digital forensic teams examined security systems and found brief interruptions in camera coverage during the night of her death. These gaps were short but precise, indicating manual interference rather than technical failure. Investigators also reviewed staff schedules and access logs. No outsider had entered the property, narrowing the list of possibilities dramatically. The breakthrough came with the discovery of her journal. It was hidden among personal belongings that had been scheduled for disposal. The pages revealed a careful record of fear, control, and preparation. Entries described dizziness after meals, changes in medication routines, and growing concern for her safety and that of her unborn child. The tone was calm but urgent, written by someone who sensed danger approaching. Financial investigators added another layer. They traced small but deliberate money transfers made in her name shortly before her death. These movements suggested planning rather than dependence. At the same time, they uncovered unusual asset shifts made by the billionaire, redirecting funds and restructuring holdings immediately after the incident. The timing raised serious questions. Finally, experts identified the chemical found in her system as one used in specialized industrial processes linked to the billionaire's companies. Access to it was tightly controlled, making accidental exposure unlikely. What once looked likely? Once the findings became impossible to contain, the case shifted from a quiet inquiry to a national scandal. Authorities moved carefully but decisively. Financial accounts connected to the billionaire were frozen, and travel restrictions were placed without public explanation. Within days, the business world sensed trouble. Board members resigned one by one, citing ethical concerns. Major investors withdrew support, and long-standing partnerships collapsed almost overnight. The empire that had taken decades to build began to fracture under the weight of suspicion. Media outlets soon uncovered fragments of the investigation. Reports questioned the rush cremation, the security system gaps, and the unexplained chemical exposure. Public opinion turned sharply. The image of a disciplined, visionary leader was replaced by that of a man hiding behind wealth and influence. As journalists dug deeper, the age discovery surfaced as a potential motive. The revelation shocked the public and reframed the story from tragedy to betrayal. International agencies became involved due to cross-border financial movements and immigration records. This widened the scope of the case and removed any remaining protection his status once offered. Former employees cooperated with investigators, providing insight into strict internal controls and unusual requests made around the time of the death. Each statement added pressure. What resonated most with the public was the pregnancy. Advocacy groups and legal experts emphasized the loss of 2 lives, not one. The unborn child became central to the moral weight of the case. Vigils were held, and the woman's name, once hidden, became a symbol of silenced vulnerability. Under mounting evidence, the billionaire's legal team struggled to slow the process. Court filings revealed a pattern of manipulation and calculated decisions. The man who once controlled narratives now faced one he could not reshape. As the trial approached, it became clear the trial concluded with a verdict that stunned both the business world and the public. The evidence presented was methodical and overwhelming. Financial records mapped intent, forensic reports established cause, and digital data closed every remaining gap. The court described the crime as calculated and driven by fear of exposure rather than emotion. The sentence reflected the severity of the act and the abuse of power that made it possible. With the conviction, the billionaire lost his freedom, his fortune, and the influence that once shielded him from scrutiny. In the months that followed, his companies were dismantled or absorbed by competitors. Properties were sold, trusts dissolved, and assets redirected through legal processes. What remained of his legacy existed only in court transcripts and investigative reports. The name that once appeared in magazines as a symbol of success became a warning about unchecked control and obsession with image. The woman's story did not disappear. Her journal was released as part of the case record, and its clarity moved many. It showed patience, awareness, and quiet resistance. Advocacy groups used the case to highlight risks faced by dependent spouses and migrants isolated by power imbalances. Policy discussions followed, focusing on medical oversight, financial transparency, and protections for those trapped behind wealth and status. The loss of the unborn child weighed heavily on the public conscience. Memorials acknowledged 2 lives taken by a single decision. The case reshaped how authorities approached deaths involving extreme influence, ensuring faster safeguards and independent reviews. In the end, the story was not about luxury or scandal. It was about how truth can surface even when buried under money and control. The silence that once surrounded the mansion was replaced by accountability. Her life, carefully documented in private, became a permanent record that outlived fear. Justice arrived late, but it arrived.